expansion,
Mm.
addition of additional countries
Mm.
into the European Union as an economic community, it's conditional.
I see.
So it's not like African integration where they says, let's all come together,
Mm.
bring our economies together and try to
I
make it work. The
see. That's a
Europeans said that, no, fundamentally, we want you to have certain macroeconomic fundamentals. We want to make sure that you manage fiscal policy in a particular way. You're going to give up your right to monetary policy. If you're going to join the monetary union, we're going to have one European central bank that manages a common currency, which is going to be the euro. And then you're going to have certain political rights, subscription to certain liberal democratic rights with regular elections being on there. So it's conditional. It was like joining a gentleman's club of the wealthy. And everybody is like, listen, I've made it in life. I'm wealthy. The fundamentals in life. And we've created something that is beautiful. So if you want to join, these are the conditions.
This is the Solomon Atah Podcast. Today we're speaking to Professor Gabila Nubong. Professor Nubong is a political and development economist at the Northwest University in South Africa. Prof, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Solomon, and thanks for having me.
Prof, how are you today? We are in January 2026. How was 2025?
It was a challenging year. But very fruitful in a number of regards. And we're looking forward to what 2026 has in store for us.
Okay, so you've been looking to the crystal ball of the economist. What are we looking at? How is the world going to move in terms of value creation? How are we going to lift people out of poverty? How are we going to create more? What do we need to combine? What are some fundamentals that we need to be looking at?
Well, the world in 2026 is in a very bumpy place.
Okay.
I think that the most significant element of the global economic infrastructure at the moment is the Trump presidency.
Okay.
And its impact upon the global supply chains. 2025 was a year where we had to deal with a lot of conflict that were disruptive in nature, i.e. the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, which at the very beginning sort of kicked off by challenging issues like grain supply to African countries. And of course, the nature of the conflict, including the presence and the persistence of the position that the European Union and the Europeans are taking in the conflict, has a resource backlash, an implication on oil prices and global oil prices and all of that. So commodity prices are quite volatile because of the conflict. Demand and supply of global oil is hugely affected by the instability in the Middle East. So we've had Israel and Gaza and Iranian conflicts with the whole instability that comes around that area. There are challenges around the supply route that goes through the Suez Canal, I think is what we call it, that links straight between Europe and Asia and Western Europe and North America. So there are threats to trade routes with the Houthis that were attacking ships going through the Suez Canal. So there are threats to global supply of goods and services. There are threats in the resource market that brings about instability because of the regions of the conflict. There are threats to supply of agricultural products because of that. There's strain on European countries because of the extent to which they are responding to the Russia-Ukraine conflict and trying to ramp up their defense spending and defense mechanism. And then, of course, there's the volatility associated with the unpredictability of the Donald Trump presidency. You know, there's the Venezuelan blockade that he has created. Few days ago, we woke up to the news of he has dropped a bomb in Nigeria, and the bombing of Iran. So the Donald Trump presidency, building upon the tariffs and the trade disruption, sort of put all of those factors together. You would say that as the global economy, we've coming from a year of high instability, due principally to conflict and unpredictability of political positioning and decisions. and we're moving, and none of that, unfortunately, have been convincingly resolved as 2025 closed.
Yes.
So we're getting to 2026 we're flying into a storm. The turbulence has not been abated, and there are no signs on the books that suggest that it's going to abate anytime soon, because there's there are deeper perspectives in the Russian-Ukraine conflict and the European position and involvement, deeper than they like to talk about. Their resilience, their insistence on prolonging the conflict, irrespective of all the efforts by the Americans to bring it to end, says that there are bigger and deeper economic implications. So the freezing of Russian assets and the use of Russian deposits in European bank to fund the war in Ukraine. So basically, drawing down on Russian assets to finance the war. It's preparing another war, because if I keep my money in your bank and then you use it without my permission, and I'm Russia, you would need to have a very good explanation as to why you must not refund that money. So that's the game in the background, which is leading now to the prolonging of war. And while all of that is going on, there is still a significant dependence on a number of European countries on Russian oil and gas.
Yeah.
So it's a complex interaction between the two, and they are going at it from different perspectives. The Brits, with under Starmer, is trying to use proximity with the US to propose a European-friendly solution. The French are not having any of it. And we are beginning to see that spill over into the African continent.
Yeah.
So the US bombing Nigeria, north of Nigeria, the proximity to Niger is the closest we have had in a very long time of American activity. Involvement in what you would call French backyard, quote unquote. So that is, in my sense, another sense of, and of course, the conflict, the fight between the global powers, Russia and China, and the Europeans and the Americans, has spillover knock-on effects on the rest of the world. So that's the global context. It's instability, it's uncertainty. So we probably are looking at a turbulent year 2026 economically as well.
Coming from an economist.
Each of these parameters, especially in the global political context, could go in any direction. We could end up in 2026 with a full-blown conflict between Russia and the European Union. Because it's a proxy war that they're fighting in Ukraine. The people who are actually fighting at the moment is Russia and Europe. Because that is from a military support and sustenance perspective, and the financial moves and all of that. That is what that war is about. The details of what sort of deals Russia strikes with Ukraine for good neighborliness seems to be secondary, in my opinion. The two people that need to determine the end of that conflict is Russia and the Europeans. And they need to sort of come to an agreement as to what their relationship would be moving forward. So you will not discard the fact that the Europeans may be pursuing regime change in Russia as, in their opinion, a possible long-term solution. But the Russians went into this knowing that
that sort of thinking is possible. Yeah.
And Donald Trump is not playing ball in a sense. So he's trying to be objective. Objective, let me not be biased. He's trying to play the middleman. So he's trying to see which deal is in the best interest of the US. And trying to also get a piece of the cake in the process.
The minerals. Yes.
The minerals and rare earths and all of that.
Absolutely.
So unfortunately, that's the world that we went into in 2026. And we can only keep our fingers crossed and hope for the best.
But that's a bit of a contrast, Prof, in terms of, if you look at some of the peace agreements that Donald Trump has signed, quite a few of them, FIFA had to give him a peace prize. He didn't have the Nobel one. But we see the one in Congo DRC, Rwanda, and some skirmishes happening after that. And Sudan, and various other parts of the continent that still have various kinds of conflict, especially conflicts that are impacting quite a bit economically on the continent.
Yeah. The DRC, M23, Rwanda, or America facilitated peace deal. I personally think that President Trump should and his administration should take credit for that, for wanting to. Because here's the thing: when the White House gets involved from a diplomatic perspective in conflict resolution, they are elevating the conflict to the global stage.
Correct. Absolutely.
They're elevating the conflict to the global stage and putting a spotlight on it, which sort of changes the parameters. It changed the parameters because they have the intelligence and they have the resources to be able to do sort of a diagnosis of the nature of the conflict. They may not manage the complexity because of the realities on the ground, but they can see troop movement, they can see capital flow movement, they can see business movement, and they can be able to identify who are the stakeholders of the conflict.
Correct.
And I think they do have, as US, the resources to be able to bring them around the table.
Correct.
And force their hand to put pen to paper and sign a peace deal.
Yes.
And I think that they also do have these are not in global terms significant players. So the US should have leverage on both countries.
I see.
In a sense. Now, whether they will be able to follow through with the commitment or whether they find themselves just under the heavy influence of the US, it's one thing that we may not be able to completely determine. Is Kagame there as a willing party? Is he truly seeking peace? Or does he have a gun to his head that tells him that, listen, we have A, B, and C on you, and if you do not play ball, we're going to pull the trigger. That you can't quite tell. I'm just happy with the fact that the conflict has been elevated to the global stage. After they came back from Washington, the fighting sort of continued. As with all conflicts, they signed on one day and then took moves of a strategic nature to gain territory so as to move the pieces in the negotiation. And I think that's the nature of conflict. People know that by the time we want to come to a final negotiation, you want to negotiate from a position of strength. So I think that's what the soldiers did. They waited for the peace deal to go through so as not to embarrass
the leaders.
The leaders. And as soon as it was that, then they proceeded with their strategic objectives on the ground. And positioned themselves in the place where they knew that if we're going to resolve this, whatever solution we have to propose is also a function of where our pieces are positioned on the ground.
I see.
So it's as can be expected with all conflict resolution. It wasn't going to be an easy one, but I'm just happy that a White House, US president decided to take the initiative to say that I would try to resolve this.
I see.
At the end of the day, resolution is going to be dependent upon the two warring parties. He may have the means and the resources and the ability to be able to make them do one or two things, but until they come to a point where they themselves want peace and agreed and do agree on the terms of peace, the initiative may not accomplish its complete objective.
Prof, as a political and development economist, Africa is integrating faster on paper than in practice. From your research, what is the single biggest political or economic illusion holding back real regional integration on the continent?
I mean, I could speak for hours on this specific subject and question, but let me just highlight a few things. So first of all, I'm very optimistic about African integration. I'm optimistic about African integration from the perspective that it seems to be a train that has left the station and it's forging ahead. Integration on paper versus implementation reality has often had a variety of explanations. People have talked about the lack of political will. have talked about the nature, the asymmetric nature of the economies, the fact that you're trying to integrate economies that are largely developing, underdeveloped. And if you look at the continental picture, there's a huge dissimilarity between the strengths and the economic abilities of each country. So I'm talking about you trying to integrate South Africa with Lesotho, Eswatini, and Botswana, or Nigeria with the Central African Republic and Equatorial. So economic integration has as its fundamental premise the argument according to which the creation of larger markets makes for economies of scale, which is meant to be advantageous.
Okay.
That's the premise. And on paper, it's a premise that is hardly disputable. The argument according to which a country that is as small as Gabon, with a population of 2 million, would not be a voice on the global stage if it went with the size of its economy and the size of its population, as opposed to it being part of a project that integrates the global economy with a population of 1.2, 1.4, 1.5 billion people, which is the African continental picture. So, intuitively, that argument makes sense.
Okay.
That says that if you are going to integrate with the global economy, or you're going to interact with the global economy on the strength of 54 small nations, which translate to small markets, versus one bloc that engages on the global stage, you go there with might, you go there with influence. But that is an argument that only speaks of potential.
Okay.
Potential benefits, potential advantages, potential influence. Why do I say it only speaks of potential? It only speaks of potential because the land mass, the size of the population, those are just statistics on paper. It's not a description of the nature of the coherence and integrated, the extent of integration of the markets. So yes, you have 1.2 billion people, but what is the buying power of the 1.2 billion people? What is their production capability?
Yes.
Why would they become an attractive source of? Why would they become an attractive source of market? So the myth or the challenges then becomes with answering those fundamental questions. The fundamental questions of how do we get 1.2 billion? Let me use that figure. How do we get 1.2 billion people to constitute a market? That becomes attractive. So one of the layman way of looking at that would be to ask yourself the question: if a country had the population of 1.2 billion, like India or China,
correct,
how do they take advantage of that demographic number to become globally competitive? And the answer is what India and China has done. So correct. You need to, and a number of ways you can address that. So you need to, one, be a coherent polity, so a coherent governance entity, where decisions can be taken on behalf of the 1.2 billion people. Let me use the example of India. That's number one. Number two, you need to develop the market potential of the market size of 1.2 billion. So in the case of China and India, they pursued infrastructure, created infrastructure, they pursued innovation, advance in technology intensity, they pursued knowledge, so human capital development, and then they pursued production capacity, so industrialization and manufacturing capabilities. So let's say in the case of China, after having sorted out issues around energy, the connectivity of the country, so they have, I was reading an article yesterday about the coverage of their speed train. I was reading an article yesterday about the nature of the infrastructure development. When you look at China today, when you compare it to Western democracies, you're going to realize that Britain and America are having infrastructures that were built in the 70s and the 80s. China, on the other hand, has infrastructure that is built in the 2000s. So they have cutting-edge, technologically advanced infrastructure development for that population of 1.5, 1.6 billion people. They have developed manufacturing capabilities that has made them to be globally competitive. So foreign direct investment flowing into China It's not flowing into a group of 1.6 billion people. It's flowing into a ready market that has already developed its market potential, its market abilities in the terms of the goods and services that it produces and manufactures. Business flows to China because production takes place in China. Exports flow out of China because China has developed manufacturing infrastructure capabilities. So they have been able to add to their size and their number prerequisites of participation in the global market.
See,
which makes them to be able to then take advantage of the fact that they are a 1.456 billion market competing with the rest of the world. Africa, on the other hand, it's 54 countries that has 54 governments that are not infrastructurally linked, not by road, not by air, not even by sea.
Not by borders.
Not by borders.
Because there's passports and visas.
Border restrictions, So these are 54 countries that are locked up in their pockets of sovereignty, as we like to argue. They are not linked. They are not linked sufficiently. If you travel between South Africa and Mozambique, or South Africa and Eswatini, or South Africa and Lesotho, or across any border crossing on the African continent, you would see the nightmare that trade trucks transporting goods from ports have to face crossing the border into the next country. So that significantly increases the cost of business, because if a truck that's supposed to just drive from Durban into Mbabane has to spend 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 days at the border, whatever it is that it's dealing with in that border crossing, including the nature of the road that it takes from the Durban port to Mbabane, all of these are costs that are accumulating whatever goods it's transporting. So by the time that you get to a point where you actually deliver the final goods to the person who has purchased the goods, their cost of buying the goods has significantly gone up, and then they translate and transfer that onto the consumer. So it slows down trade, slows down production capabilities. If those were inputs into production process, then the cost of production has just significantly gone up. And whoever it is that is producing that good, ferrying those materials from a port on bad roads with police control and border control, is not going to be able to produce whatever output they intend at a globally competitive, because their cost of production is just simply low. Now that explains why industry would not strive, because there is no infrastructure for industry to strive. Now these are practical integration related issues. So when African integration then says that we want to smash open the borders and facilitate trade, those are things that have a double-edged sword, because when you open the border and facilitate trade within these equal economies, there's a fear that you're going to have mobility of labor from the poorer country to the rich country to increase their question of unemployment, as is the case of countries flocking to South Africa, for example. So South Africa is going to say, yes, we want African integration, but we have finite resources, we have a population with lots of challenges. We cannot cater for all of Africa. So we need to put restrictions on movement of people. We need to put restrictions at the level of the borders of movement of trucks. In fact, we have issues as petty as South African truck drivers complaining about the employment of truckers moving in from the rest of the continent to come and make use of their port facility, which is paid for in Durban. And then the locals are going to complain that they do not like the idea that Zambian drivers or Malawian drivers or Zimbabwean drivers are driving trucks on South African roads, because they are taking truck driver jobs that is supposed to go to South Africans. But at the same time, they want the port of Durban to serve as an entry route to move goods up all the way to Zambia and all the way to Malawi. So
Zimbabwe.
These are the contradictions of underdevelopment that makes integration complex and makes it a political question that the South African government needs to then strike a balance between trade promotion and domestic unemployment or domestic employment creation. So it must then find a formula that says we must sieve and filter who comes into the country, We need to be able to have to give work permits to people. We need to be able to control our borders in order to manage our economy. Now, the South African situation is typical of most African countries.
Yes.
That says that we would then advance or argue that integration is beneficial on paper, but when it comes to its actual implementation, we have other realities we must take into consideration, which is the whole national responsibility, national tax base, national population, that is the voting population. So the South African government or South African population votes its government to take care of South African responsibilities, not of African responsibilities. They get elected to solve South African problems. And they may have idealism that makes them think that African integration is a good idea, but their primary accountability is to take care of the well-being of their people. And they are going to put the well-being of their people ahead of African integration because at the end of the day, idealism and pragmatism, they need to reconcile. So when your population goes to bed hungry because they're unemployed, they don't have time to think about the benefits of African integration.
Integration, correct.
Yeah. So these are some of the challenges that says that, and let me just make a second point on that. Integration, and I think is one of the questions, integration in the European Union, for example, was integration between prosperous countries.
I see, because that example comes up quite a bit.
Yes, it was integration between
polite conversations. Yeah,
prosperous countries. So the Industrial Revolution in 18th century Britain spread wealth, spread prosperity. They established liberal democracies. They already had a long culture of industrialization, a long culture of trade, a long culture of capital, a long culture of financial markets development. The slave trade was European capitalism on human beings because it was about plantation production and the triangular trade and the whole conversation. So they already had that long established culture of entrepreneurship and of business and of trade and all of that. So and of course, in terms of development of the economies, it was integration between somewhat similarly prosperous countries that had somewhat similar shared institutions in terms of adherence to liberal democracy. And so it was about, now that you're doing well and now that we're doing well, how can we then come together to become a global force, which was sort of the rationale around European integration from very onset, with people like Margaret Thatcher saying that we are individually prosperous as countries, but our voice will not be significant in the global stage to compete with the US and Japan of the time.
Yes.
China was not the concern at the time. At the time, it was Japan and the US. Unless we can be able to bring our economies together and constitute a common economic bloc. So that was the rationale, and which is sort of still the rationale, still pursuing that. And because they came together as already succeeding prosperous countries, by the way, it's one of the reasons why addition of additional countries into the European Union as an economic community, it's conditional.
I see.
So it's not like African integration where they says, let's all come together, bring our economies together and try to make it work. The Europeans said that, no, fundamentally, we want you to have certain macroeconomic fundamentals. We want to make sure that you manage fiscal policy in a particular way. You're going to give up your right to monetary policy. If you're going to join the monetary union, we're going to have one European central bank that manages a common currency, which is going to be the euro. And then you're going to have certain political rights, subscription to certain liberal democratic rights with regular elections being on there. So it's conditional. It was like joining a gentleman's club of the wealthy. And everybody is like, listen, I've made it in life. I'm wealthy. The fundamentals in life. And we've created something that is beautiful. So if you want to join, these are the conditions. Correct. That's why it comes like Turkey has been knocking on the doors for a very long time, and they're not being admitted into the European Union because they do not meet the certain criteria for admission into the gentleman's club. So that then defines the nature of the institutions that were set up, the kind of integration that was practiced. So in international relations parlance, we call it supranationalism. So this is where countries come together and then agree to form a common political entity that has responsibility on certain aspects of the governance of the general, and they voluntarily hand over responsibility. So the split of governance. the split up governance and say that, okay, we will retain political authority, we will retain our rights to manage a number of elements of our national sovereignty, but we are going to give the responsibility on certain aspects of our national governance to a centralized authority that we empower financially and legally to take responsibility to manage that on our behalf. So they are going to be responsible for monetary policy in the case of the European Central Bank.
Yep.
We're going to get a number of entities that coordinate our efforts. So we're going to set up a European Parliament that looks at legislative at the level of the general continental body. And then we are going to have a common external foreign policy. So we're going to create the European External Action Service. We will appoint a foreign minister that speaks for Europe. That takes charge and responsibility for our foreign policy. We are going to have a common defense pact, but in this case, we would make sure that our membership with NATO takes responsibility of our external defense responsibility. We would only do just one or two maintenance level strategic military operations for our national security interest, but the defense of Europe, the shield that covers our collective defense, we are going to hand that over to the Americans. It's going to be NATO. We are going to coordinate and compare notes when it comes to our social policies. So we're going to compare notes when it comes to education. We're going to compare notes when it comes to health. We're going to compare notes when it comes to the welfare of our citizens and the quality of our democracy. We're going to police each other to make sure that things are done nicely. And then we are going to throw open our borders. So we're going to create infrastructure of road, rail, telecommunications that makes it possible for our people to just
move around.
Yes. To move around freely without any situation. So in those terms, they were creating a single political entity that could qualify as a European market under very strict regulations and under very strict conditions. And they could then, because they now have a bureaucracy in Brussels that takes responsibility of the management of those ingredients that make for their collective well-being, say that they are a region that is integrated and is interacts with the rest of the world. Africa did not approach it from that perspective.
I see.
So the bureaucracy that we have in Addis,
yes,
it's a coordination mechanism. It's an intergovernmental cooperation entity. It's a glorified secretariat, for lack of a better word. It doesn't have any power over the member states of the African Union. But the African Union cannot move into any country and do jack. It does not have the legislative power. It does not have the political power. There's no responsibility it has over any single African country. The Assembly of Heads of States meet together, define priorities, identify agenda items, agree on what's going to happen. When the summit is over, they go to their respective countries and manage their countries. The facilitation role of the African Union Commission is meant there to speak for Africa on token issues. It's more a moral authority.
Thank you. Prof. I was just chatting to someone over this podcast, and I said to them, in September, why don't we just have one person go from the African Union to the United States or to United Nations General Assembly and speak on behalf of the continent? And you've just responded to why that is not the case. Because it seems to my understanding that African Union doesn't really work for African integration the way the European Union does, like you've explained.
Yeah. So the processes of integration adopted by the two entities is somewhat different, which is very frustrating for a lot of Africans because they hear the name African Union and they expect certain things from the African Union.
Yeah.
But the African Union has not yet been empowered by the African Union or the African member states. The Commission has not yet been empowered with certain delegated authority, transfer of sovereignty to act on behalf of the continent.
Yeah.
Member states are still retaining that responsibility. They still want to sit at the United Nations. Maybe optimistically and positively would eventually get there. But there's nothing at the moment that sort of suggests that that's going to happen tomorrow. So member states retain their right to be sovereign, they retain their right to represent themselves, and the African Union is busy trying to bring work together and to cooperate in a number of areas. And that cooperation is really, in a sense, voluntary.
Wow.
The minute the member state says that this is no longer serving my national interest,
Yes.
that's
They're
it.
gone.
Yeah, you can force them. So the African Union then has a responsibility to settle for areas and aspects where it retains a moral voice, and then promotes or suggests to African countries aspects that are beneficial for them. So they will take a lead on something like the African Continental Free Trade Area.
Yep.
Because in the African Continental Free Trade Area, they are serving as a coordination mechanism for trade facilitation.
I see.
They're playing a coordination role to say that, okay, listen, we can help your economies talk to each other. We can serve as a clearinghouse to get your business people to get to know what business opportunities there are in other parts of the continent. We can also do the practical work of policy harmonization, so custom rules between one country and the other. We can do the practical work of border post management
of some sort,
facilitation to make guys be able to do business with each other. And we can do the one-stop post of doing the research that helps you to see the benefits of integration. So it's really a charm offensive. It's really, this is what we can offer you. This is what we can do for you. This is, we can play the coordination function of facilitating your interaction with each other. But at the end of the day, the decision is yours to make.
The African Continental Free Trade Act, which you've sort of started to touch on it, is often framed as Africa's economic salvation. And they're structurally capable of transforming Africa's economy. Or are we repeating some EU fantasies without the EU discipline?
We have to deal with what we have. There are lots of lessons that we can draw from the European Union in terms of how markets should be integrated.
Okay.
The European Union serves as a model that we can go to for pragmatic appreciation of implementation procedures, step by step, on questions on how do you create a common market? How do you facilitate trade between countries? So should we not look to Europe? I don't think so. I think that Europe continues to provide a model.
Okay.
The only difference is we then have the responsibility of clearly identifying how different we are from the European experience.
Yeah.
To be able to determine what is it about the experience that we can learn from.
As a colonized, as a colonized people.
What is it that we can learn from? So the colonization aspect of it, I'm not going to delve into that.
Okay.
For the simple fact that I try to stay objective and pragmatic in this instance to say that the colonization, for me, as far as is related to the African Continental Free Trade Area, only has one significant impact. It determines the structures of the economies that are trying to integrate.
Okay.
So to go back to our earlier conversations about capitalism and mercantilism, African economies did not develop organically as business entities that sought to integrate with the rest of the world. Their markets were created artificially. Their production structures were created artificially. So colonization and the slave trade, colonization essentially was European, I'm now speaking about European colonization, was European development of sources of raw material from the colonies to supply the markets of the North. And so the infrastructure that went with that, the agricultural development that went with that, the education that went with that, as in the development of the first set of public servants, gave most African countries their first endowments of a modern state.
See.
Production structure, infrastructure, including roads, rail, electricity, and water, dams and all of that, and telecommunications and all of that, and the first bureaucracy that had the responsibility of public policy. So the first bureaucracy that had the responsibility of public policy were essentially colonially trained African administrative clerks for the most part.
Is that you are a NAM in French?
So in the case of French Africa, they were trained in the Grandes Écoles, some of them with a political clear mandate. So that, speaking about French colonization specifically, we do know that then there was this British decolonization came a couple of decades ahead of French decolonization. So from the 1945 already Manchester Conference, which attended by people like Nkrumah and Patrice Lumumba, and sort of what do we call them, nationalists of African decolonization process. Britain, with a long history of the fight against slavery, had taken steps ahead and had made a conscious, voluntary decision to change its colonization model to back and leave. Decolonization was thrust on the French. They discovered that the fight was changing.
Like that.
They were not ready to get let go. So the struggle in Nigeria, struggled again in North Africa, fought a few wars of independence, and then realized that no, these people across the continent are determined to be free. We cannot keep fighting liberation movements from country to country to country. What we need to do is create a crop of French-trained black elites that are going to take over and preserve our interests. Because for them, it was about the interest. It wasn't about the freedom of the people. Which is what they did. And so then, unfortunately, which is a different case, it's not a broadly African case, it's a case specific to African French colonies.
Correct.
Their endowment of the first crop of public servants were, for lack of a better word, auxiliaries of the French administration.
Yes.
To continue French neocolonialism, as we have come to call it these days. But from a development perspective, and of course that had a knock-on effect, which is, you must have heard, it had a knock-on effect on the very development of the African Union itself. Because when the African Union was being put together as an entity that was going to, when it was set up as the Organization of African Unity, and for those of us who are not very steeped in the research, its objective was primarily political, and it was meant to serve as the principal entity that was going to fight for the rest of the decolonization of the African continent, and for the end of apartheid in South Africa. That was the political objective. So when Nkrumah, and of course this was building up on the back of 1945 Manchester conference, decolonization conference. So when Nkrumah and Jomo Kenyatta and the nationalists of the African continent moved towards the establishment of Organization of African Unity, the French activated their I'm looking for a very polite word to call them. Activated their points people on the continent, and they grew this very big disagreement among African leaders, which has been classically called the Monrovia Group and the Casablanca Group, where I think in this case the Monrovia Group that was headed by Kwame Nkrumah largely was pushing for absolute political integration between Africa, the creation of an African federation. So African federation, so it would have had a United States of Africa similar to the United States of America, where the various countries were going to be political entities, autonomous and governing themselves, with us having a common African Union government headed by a head of state.
Correct.
So that was independence by deep integration. To say that let's come together, let's form a common entity, let's have one political entity, let's be like the United States of America, for lack of a better word.
Yes.
And the French then activated some of their guys from the respective colonies to say that no, Nkrumah is ambitious, he wants to govern all of Africa, want fast-paced integration. We have just acquired our independence. We want to preserve our national sovereignty. So they disagreed. They disagreed and says that we don't want fast-paced integration, we want progressive integration. Let us cooperate at low level issues. Let us start from cooperation to integration and give ourselves give ourselves a long time to become a political entity. So that was going to cause the project of the African Unity, Organization of African Unity, not to be set up from the onset. So I think the king of Morocco at the time brokered peace, brought these two together and sort of came up with a balance that says, this is our first show of unity to the rest of the world. We cannot fail on the first project. Let's strike a compromise. They came up with the Organization of African Unity, which then became an entity that was pure intergovernmental cooperation, where member states retain their national sovereignty and then they look at cooperating on joint political objectives, joint economic objectives, and so on and so forth. So the conceptualization of the model from the onset was the reconciliation of a division that was the fruit of colonialism. That was the fruit of French influence.
How frustrating.
So from the very foundation of the establishment of the entity, the divide between former French colonies and the really independent African countries showed up at the Organization of African Unity. Of course, we know that France went ahead to, including what the Belgians did to the DRC Congo, France went ahead to make sure that the nationalists of all the countries where they were fighting for independence ended up not taking power. So in
all of them, successfully so.
Successfully so. They made sure that the nationalists did not take power. So the country of a country that we both may master, in the case of Cameroon, they made sure that the nationalists of our times were the Umnyobes and the Felix Ume and the people of the UPC. So what they then did in the case of Cameroon is that they then propped up the elites of the north, gave power to Ahidjo, and they used French military might to crush the UPC, which were the people that were advocating, which were the people who incidentally were fighting for independence. There is no history or record of Ahidjo having led any pro-independence move in Cameroon. Power was trust given to him because he was one of those who were trained in France and sent for the purpose. And of course, the person who took over after him perpetuated the system. So they made sure that systematically the nationalists that fought for independence and wanted Pan-Africanist integration were set aside from the game. You know, they knocked them out and replaced them with other locals that sort of took responsibility. I mean, they did that carefully in each and every country. In the case of Nigeria, they went in, they looked at the Fulanis of the north and the Hausas and the Yorubas. I realized that the Yorubas are intellectual and they're going to be people that are going to be able to question administration. So they gave power to Tafawa Balewa. I think Tafawa Balewa was the first prime minister, together based on his proximity with Amadou Bello, who was, I think, the emir of Kano or somewhere of the north. So decolonization in each of those countries then altered the structure of public servants and public power, which means that most of the African governments that took over to kickstart the development project shared a number of common characteristics. One, these were colonially trained. For the most part, the colonially trained, and their colonial training was clerical and administrative in nature. They were not engineers. They were not engineers. They were not people that were meant to conceptualize the infrastructure development of state, or to conceptualize what does it take to build a modern economy that has a production structure that can make it globally competitive. They were clerical staff that had been trained in the grounds economy in the case of French colonization, and their responsibility was administrative, to take over the assets of the colonial administration.
Manage a colonial enterprise.
Manage a colonial enterprise, which in most cases was some low-level, maybe vast industrial complex in the context of Cameroon, like the CDC, which was the biggest asset that the government took on at independence, and of course with the monetary arrangements and the structure of the economy that was set up, it kept them dependent. So there was no room for large-scale, heavy lifting developmental projects because did not have the capabilities, they did not have the capacity, and then they did not have the resources for that. They had to start paying civil servants salary from day one, and they had to start managing primary resource-based economies from day one. So even when they started discovering that they owned minerals and these minerals were sought after and desired from the rest of the world, the administration that had been put in place did not have, in some instances, the discipline, in some instances, the capability, in most instances, did not have the technical expertise to be able to explore those resources. So they started off by setting up very exploitative contracts to be able to explore those resources, to be able to get some sort of income coming in for the country because they do not have the capability.
This leads me to this question, Prof. Sorry to break your thought, but I just want to put this question because I see that it might sort of add some kind of value to what you are already saying. But this means that, or let me put it this way, youth unemployment and economic stagnation continue despite decades of development frameworks. Are African governments genuinely trying to solve unemployment or managing it politically to maintain stability?
Let me not generalize. We need to be honest to acknowledge that in 2026, we talk about youth unemployment across the African continent. It's not a shared experience. In other words, there are some countries that are getting it right and are sort of making it. Rwanda, for example, notwithstanding the very colorful elements that are associated with its economic emergence and the model that it's pursuing, has been very serious about youth unemployment.
Correct.
Especially since 1994. I happened to study with the Rwandans that came on government scholarships, who ended up finished up their degree and went back to work for their governments. There are a number of African countries. It's a general problem. The severity varies from country to country.
Okay.
The general reality or why it persists in most countries, for me, it's a very simple. Most of the economies do not have the kind of dynamism that it takes to address unemployment in a mass way. So the economies are stagnant. The economies are not dynamic. The economies are not vibrant. They're not innovative. They're not producing. Because how do you solve unemployment? By creating jobs. That's how you solve unemployment. And how do you create jobs? You create jobs by creating opportunities. In classical economic terms, possibilities for production to take place.
Correct.
Because as production takes place, that's how you absorb factors of production, including labor. So it can either come from an extensively vibrant, dynamic private sector that is expanding in its ability to create opportunities. Or it can come from large-scale government-driven projects. Public parastatals, public manufacturing by parastatals, for example, or a public-private partnership. But in each of the cases, whether it becomes a private sector-driven or it's a public sector-driven or it's a combination of the two, there has to be some sort of dynamism that says that the economy is on the move.
Correct.
There is opportunities
that spurs people up.
Spurs people to participate in creation of jobs. The strength of the European economy and of the American economy, by the way, is that employment creation is largely private sector driven. So I do not have the numbers offhand, but if you go to Germany, there are lots of major and small size enterprises that have businesses here that are participating in production value chains, are providing supplies for industry. There's a whole integrated system that says while you have big capital that has undertaken large-scale manufacturing entities that is exporting rate of all, you have small capital that is feeding into that process, whether it's in the agricultural value chain or it's in the manufacturing value chain. There's a sense in which public responsibility has been to create the infrastructure, educate the population, so create the knowledge base, and then provide a platform for individual enterprise to express itself by creating the right regulatory framework, by creating a reasonable taxation framework, by creating the right support system structure that says that you have energy, you have infrastructure, you have telecommunications, you have depth of knowledge in terms of the quality of education.
Yep.
So train the people to produce, educate them,